Hello and welcome to part 2 of this 3-part series on running virtual choir projects. In this part I'll be going through my workflow of editing the audio that has come in from my members for one of the virtual choir projects. Before we start that though, a few caveats. The first being that in part 1 I did mention that I would show my workflow in Logic Pro 10, which is my usual DAW or audio editing package, as well as the free software Audacity. I've actually decided not to show how it can be done in Audacity because since I recorded that first part, a number of videos have popped up on YouTube that show just that, and I've put links to those in the description below. So if you would like to see how this can be done in Audacity, do have a look at the description below for those links. So that's the first caveat. The second one is that I am not a Logic Pro expert, but I do hope that this video gives you an indication of my workflow so you can create and devise your own. As I mentioned in part 1, I work exclusively on Mac, and for the virtual choir projects I use Logic Pro 10 for the audio editing, which I'll show you in this video, and Final Cut Pro for the video editing. So this video will just be showing my workflow on Logic Pro 10. As mentioned, similar results can be achieved on other DAWs, DAWs, such as GarageBand and free software like Audacity, but just bear in mind that with the free software the functionality may be more limited and you might not be able to achieve everything I show you in this video. To help navigate this video, I've broken my workflow into sections and will outline them here and put timings in the description below so you can skip about this video. First, I will show you how I set up Logic for editing the audio that I've received from the choir members and how I use the original guide tracks I sent them as the basis for this main edit. Given that I've done so many virtual choir projects now, I've set up a template in Logic to make things faster. If you'd like a copy of the template that you'll see me using throughout this video, do drop me an email and I'll send it to you. Second, I go through how the template works, explaining how I use it and the various features. We will then add and synchronize all the soprano entries. I have also included my adding of the other vocal parts for the sake of completeness, but you may wish to skip this section as it repeats what has already been shown when I was doing the sopranos. I then look at aspects of moulding the performance so it sounds more like a choir recording by adding reverb, pan and EQ to balance and blend the voices and put them in a physical space. I next detail how I correct mistakes that may have cropped up in the individual submissions, such as tuning errors and rhythmic problems, before finally bouncing down the mix ready to add to the video I'll create in part 3 of this series. The first thing we're going to need to do before we can edit any of the audio we've received is return to our guide tracks. This project you're looking at now are the guide tracks for the Skyboat virtual choir that I ran. If I just zoom in a little bit here, you can see the introduction telling the voice which voice it is, the spiel that I tell the choir how to set up, the 4 clicks, and then the piano accompaniment along the top. This is in essence exactly the same as what I showed you in part 1. The creation of the guide tracks for the choir. It just so happens that this is for a different project. This was for Skyboat, as I've already said. Let's have a quick look round to remind ourselves how it all works. Virtual choir, project Skyboat song. This is the soprano part. Recording your entry. Information, the clicks. Introduction. And freeze watching the camera. So as with Make You Feel My Love in the previous video, I next mixed down the 3 voice parts and sent them out as separate tracks to the choir so that they could then record their entries against them. I use these guide tracks as the basis for my mixing of the entries that I receive. I've in fact set up a template that I use because I've done so many virtual choir projects now. You don't need to use a template yourself, but if you end up doing the same thing over and over again, it's worth setting up a template. In Logic this is pretty easy and there's videos out there that show you how to do this. So if I just open my template, here it is. You'll notice that this looks very, very similar to the previous projects in which I created the guide tracks. We have a track at the top for the accompanist, but this time we have 4 groups or stacks. Now with this particular project I didn't actually need the tenors because Skyboat, the arrangement is for SAB, so I'll delete the tenor part. Before we do that, let's just click on this group and see what's inside. you'll notice that it consists of several individual tracks that have all been grouped together. Now it just so happens, as I say, we don't need that, so let's get rid of that. This project's SAB, and then I'm going to save it, ready to import the audio that I need from the guide tracks and also from the members that have submitted their audio to me and their videos. So let's just save this quickly. Now I've got that saved, I'm going to go back to my guide track project that I showed you at the beginning, and I'm going to grab everything that is on the accompaniment stave. So that's going to be the accompaniment with Johnny, my accompanist, playing, and also the clicks that you can see and the spiel that I did at the beginning. So I've highlighted it all, I've copied it, and I'm now going to paste it into this project, the template. Now when I copy this across, I'm always really careful that I maintain the temporal integrity of everything that I've copied across. In other words, the clicks at the beginning must still relate in exactly the same way to the accompaniment as they did in the guide tracks that I sent out. If I accidentally move the clicks away or towards the accompaniment, it's going to then be different to the guide tracks that were sent out, and that would then cause timing issues. I've just deleted the beginning because we don't need that anymore, but I've made sure that I've kept everything else exactly the same as it was in the guide tracks. The next thing I like to do is turn on the lock track function. This will prevent me from making any mistakes like moving tracks around or changing anything by accident. So you can see that you just have to right click on the track to bring that menu up, and now it will allow me to lock it, and if I try to move it, it won't move anymore, and that's exactly what I want. So I know that it's now locked in place. Okay, let's have a deeper look into the soprano group. You can see I've got loads of tracks, more than I'm going to need, but I can delete them. And I can change the individual volume of each track and also the pan to affect where the voice appears in the stereo image. And this is all replicated on the left-hand side. You can see if I move the slider and the pan, and you can see exactly the same thing happening on the left-hand side. It's just a replication. So if I go back to my project where I created the guide tracks, I'm going to copy and paste the guide track for the soprano that Chloe recorded, and I'm going to paste it into the template. So let's just copy it, return to the template, and I'm going to paste it roughly in the right area on that top soprano track in the soprano group. Now it's not likely to be in exactly the right place, so we're going to have to test this and just have a listen. Okay, it's late, so let's move it back a bit. That sounds better. Still a bit late, move it back a bit more. Sounding better. Carry the light that's born to be king. Right, that sounds right now, so I'm going to lock that in place. And I'm going to use that guide track that I've just locked to synchronize all of the soprano entries that I've received. This is the reason why in part 1 I really stressed the importance of investing time in producing really good quality guide tracks, because your singers will have modelled their performance on that guide track, and if the guide track is of good quality, it makes it a lot easier to do the synchronization process, as you're about to see. So now we're going to do exactly the same with the alto part. I go back to my guide project, copy the alto part that I created, and paste it roughly in the right area, and then testing it and moving it until it's exactly in the right position. Often it's useful to use the zoom in feature so you can actually see what's going on. So zooming in either horizontally or vertically, and just moving it so it's just right. Carry the light that's born to be king. Now we know that that's in the right position, I'm going to lock that so I can't move it again. And that's going to become the track that we synchronize all of the alto entries to. Now to save time, I'm going to speed up the video while I copy and paste across the baritone guide track, as you don't need to see that for a third time. So now in my template I have the accompaniment and the 3 guide voice tracks that I sent out to my choir, and I can use those to synchronize all the entries that I've received too. So I've now saved my template, given it the title Skyboat Virtual Choir Project, and now we're going to have a bit of a deeper look at the template. Now, one of the reasons why I use groups to organise my projects is because it makes it a lot easier to see the individual voices. So for example, I can see the baritones, I can see all the altos when I bring them in, and I can see all the sopranos, and it makes it a lot easier to navigate the project. I also like to label the tracks as I bring them in and synchronise them, just so it makes it easier if I have to go back and change anything or find any errors or problems or undo any work. Let's just label the alto guide track. And finally the baritone guide track. There we go. Using groups to organise your tracks has other benefits as well in the workflow. So if we just open, let's just see, open one of the other voices, you'll notice that I've been using the mute buttons, and I mute here as well as there when I mute. Let's see why that is. So if I turn this on, the sound from Chloe's track is going through this fader and through the pan, then it's going through the master group fader for sopranos, for all the sopranos, and it's going straight to the stereo out, which then goes to your headphones or to your speakers. And remember that this individual soprano track is being replicated on the left-hand side. Now if I click on Chloe's track again so we can see it on the left-hand side, you'll notice it's got a bus on it. Now a bus allows us to split the signal further. So at the moment the signal is going through this fader, her track fader, as well as the group track fader, which allows us to control the volume of all of the sopranos at once, whereas the individual fader only allows us to control Chloe's track. So that group one allows us to affect all of the sopranos. But as well as that, the sound is also being split to this bus. Now if I go up to my mixer, I'll explain how that works. Now I usually have two screens and have the mixer on a separate screen, so I'm just going to have to move things around here so you can see both at the same time. Now you can see down the bottom in blue here, these are the groups that we've got. They're the faders for the groups, exactly the same as in the main project, and I've got those muted at the moment. And then in yellow we have the 4 buses, one for each of the voice groups. Now the tenor one is still there, even though I deleted the main group earlier, but don't worry about that. So on each of these buses I have what's called Space Designer. Now Space Designer is a reverb unit, one of the best in Logic, and you can see that on each of the buses I have the same reverb open, large choir hall. Okay, let's see how this all works. So if I just loop a little bit of the music, and I'm going to turn the reverb off, the bus for the sopranos, and I'm also going to turn off the main soprano group, and you'll notice that all you can hear is the piano, and that's because the main group's off. If I turn it on, there she is. Now the reason why this is happening is because the signal's being muted when it gets to the top of the group. If I turn it on and off, you can hear that. But remember that the signal is also being split by the bus, which is currently muted. If I unmute that, so the reverb bus is now unmuted and we have a listen. You're now just hearing Chloe through the reverb bus. So I've turned the main group off. And now gradually mixing in some of the dry sound. Now I've set up that bus on all of the soprano tracks. Now this is the reason why I use templates, because if not, I'd have to do this every time I did a new project. So it means that each of these soprano tracks is routed through the bus and to the main mix, so I can control the wet and dry sounds coming from the sopranos. The same applies to the altos. It's exactly the same, but a separate bus on a separate channel. You can see the alto bus there with the same reverb unit. Now one of the things I did when setting up this template is I set the buses to be pre-fade. That means that the bus is not affected by the main fader of the channel. The way you do this is when you've put the bus on the channel, on the left-hand channel strip, that's on the far left, the vertical one that I've highlighted here, right-click on it and click pre-fade. This will mean that the signal going to the bus is unaffected by the main channel fader, and that way it will behave in exactly the same way as you see here in this video. Let's just have a look at one of the alto tracks. We'll use the guide track that I've got in the alto part already. If I unmute the main group and play her, you can hear her. She's also going through the bus, the alto bus. And if I bring her down in the mix, that's reducing the dry signal, adding a bit more dry signal so she becomes more present. And there you go, exactly the same. Right, so now our mix project is set up. I'm going to need to bring in all the audio from my members. So I have that all sitting in another folder. If we have a quick look, you can see all the soprano videos sitting here, all labeled, ready to import. And I'm going to need to line them up with the 4 synchronization clicks. So I'm just going to widen or zoom in so we can see those clicks a bit clearer. I'll make them loop so we can hear them again and again. There they are, looping round. So now I'm going to bring in my first soprano. I know Chloe's on the top one, the guide track, so I'm going to bring in Amanda. Drag her into here, drop her roughly in the right place. And we don't want to open the video, we just want the audio, so extract the audio. For some reason you'll notice that Logic puts an extra track at the top for reasons unknown, and it has this little lock on it. So that stops us from moving it left and right, which is useful, we'll see that later. But we can drag it down to her track, and I'm going to label it Amanda, so I can keep track of who's where. And we're going to right click and SMPTE unlock. That'll allow us to move it left and right. And what we're looking for is her claps. There they are, we can see them. So we're going to line them roughly up with claps 3 and 4 of mine, just roughly for now. And I'm going to set my right click tool to be a pair of scissors so I can get rid of that. Obviously left click, right click, here are the options up here, and just delete that. And now I'll bring in my next voice, just doing everything very roughly at the moment. So bringing in the next person, moving her down, SMPTE unlock, finding the claps, putting it roughly in the right place, and clicking and removing, making sure we're labeling the track as well. We'll do one more before I speed up the video to speed things along. We're bringing Joking. Here she is, drag her in. Drag her down to the right track, SMPTE, unlock, right click, move her along until we find the clicks roughly in the right place, and label her track. Right, now I've done 3 in real time, I'll speed the video up to save some time. Let's just add the other voices in, here we go. One of the things you've got to prepare yourself for with the virtual choir projects is a lot of repetitive work. As you can see, this is just the sopranos I'm dealing with at the moment, and it's the same thing over and over again, bringing them in, roughly lining them up, cutting the start, labeling the track. And now I've got them all in and labeled, I'm going to delete the rest of the tracks that I don't need. So I've run out of my sopranos, now I've put them all in, so I'm not going to need all these extra tracks, so let's just get rid of them. And when I've deleted these spare tracks, I'm going to see what the rough synchronization sounds like. Here goes. That's not bad considering I just did that by eye. And now for the proper synchronization. So I'm going to mute, oops, that's soloing. Just mute everybody apart from Amanda and of course the backing track with the clicks on. And let's have a quick listen. I'm going to zoom in a bit so we can see as well. There we go. We'll get on with Helen, and even though you can see the first and hear that the first click is in time, or the first clap, the second one is out. Strange. It seems to be a phenomenon that I've noticed when doing this, that people rarely do their second clap in time. But as long as one of them lines up, you're fine. Usually the first one, as I say. Let's carry on lining them up. If you're really worried about your participants not being able to clap in time, well, you can do what Eric Whittaker used to do. And what he used to do in his early virtual choir projects is ask his participants not to plug their headphones in until after the synchronization click. That way the pre-recorded synchronization click also appears on their recording. Then they plug their headphones in to sing. If you need finer adjustments, Logic is set by default to snap to smart, as you can see up here. I like to set it to ticks. That gives me a bit of finer control on the movement from left to right. See, on smart, it's a bit like quantizing. Logic snaps to a grid, so you can sometimes find that you can't get it in exactly the sweet spot. Let's have a look. Doing this one on smart. Yep, that sounds all right. Let's move on. And again, smart, as I say, it does snap, you'll find, on smart. And you can obviously set it to the bar level. Now, we're not actually synchronized with the bars in Logic in the first place, so that would be not a good idea. But for those finer adjustments, setting it to ticks works for me. This is all looking and sounding pretty good. And finally, Wanda. Look at her second clap, way out of time. So there's a quick listen again. Right, now they're all unsynchronized. Let's unmute them all and have a quick listen. Excellent. I'm sorry if you can hear me waxing lyrical in the background on some of those Logic playbacks. It's because my screen grabber recorded me talking at the time when I recorded this. But anyway, let's move on. We're going to cut the tracks here just before the guide track comes in. And the reason why we're going to do that is because of normalizing. So if I just cut these now, normalizing is going to bring everybody up to roughly the same volumes. You can see some people are really quiet and some people are much louder. So we're going to try to bring everyone up to the same volume via a process of normalizing. Now normalizing takes the waveform, and as you can see in Chloe and Amanda's it's nice and big. But if we take Helen's is a lot smaller. Normalizing analyzes the whole waveform and it looks for the loudest point. So in this track, let's say it's here for example, it's found that to be the loudest point, and when you click normalize it'll analyze that and it will try to increase that all the way up to 0 dB or to whatever you set it. So it increases the volume of that loudest point to just under clipping, and it increases everything else in proportion to that. So it makes everything a lot louder without clipping. Now of course, if we were to include these claps, that would skew the normalization process because these are really loud, so we then wouldn't have a good normalization. So I remove all of those, get rid of them, because we don't need them anymore anyway, everything's synchronized. And then I go through one at a time, click File and Normalize, and you'll see the waveform jump. Now some of these may already be normalized as a result of the recording device that your member has used or your participant has used. So you'll see sometimes it will actually tell you that it's already normalized, but you can see the waveform increasing quite substantially, particularly if you look under just where it says File, where you can see the whole waveform. So this will mean it'll be a lot easier to hear everybody, and they will all be roughly the same level. It's worth normalizing before you check the final synchronization, just so it makes it really clear to be able to hear everybody. You'll notice sometimes Logic takes a few seconds to compute the normalization. That's where it's analyzing it and bringing everything up to the right level. Right, I think that's just about done now. Okay, now that's all done, I'm going to fine check my synchronization by finding a good spot in the song where there's quite a lot of movement, possibly a lot of consonants. That could do. And I'll check the other files against that. So let's loop that and turn on Amanda. Great, Amanda sounded good, but Helen looks by eye to be slightly out. Let's have a listen. I think I might go for my fine control, so I'm going to go to ticks, just move it slightly, zoom in a little bit. Again, it gives us more play if we zoom in. Also zoom in vertically so we can see. Sometimes it's good to do it by eye. There we go. Excellent. And as I find the sweet spot of synchronization, I right click and SMPT lock, so the little lock appears. That's make sure everything is locked in position and I can't accidentally move them. So let's move on to the next track, do the next one. Okay, I'll turn down Logic a little bit now while I carry on working in the background, checking the final synchronization. And I thought I'd share some of the experiences I've gleaned over these last 9 projects that I've done. You can hear that although the synchronization is coming along, that they're synchronized at most of the time, but often there are little mistakes, little nuances like harsh consonants and sibilances that are not lining up. Now, these are facets of performance. In other words, they're errors that have crept into the singer's performance. And there won't just be rhythmic errors, they're likely to be pitching errors as well. This is often, I believe, due to the singers not being used to this method of performing. They're used to singing live on stage with other singers around them, and I know for a fact that most of my singers will have not recorded themselves ever, and even if they have, they wouldn't have recorded themselves necessarily with live video and with microphones and headphones and goodness knows what else. So it can be a new novel experience and quite a threatening experience for the novice singer, and as a result, you are likely to get not their best performances, certainly not as good a performance that they will give in live performance settings. Now, we can adjust all of those errors out, we can use FlexiTime in Logic to remove the timing errors and FlexiPitch to remove the pitch errors. But I would advise against doing it at this stage, because if you do it at this stage, you're likely to adjust absolutely every nuance. And if you do that, you'll generate a very plasticky, synthetic sounding overall performance. Because of course it's those errors, those minor errors and pitch fluctuations and rhythmic fluctuations that give the magic of live performance, that give it the human quality. So the best thing I can advise is don't do any adjustments at this stage. Sort all your synchronization out, then listen to the whole section back, and if there's anything glaringly out of tune or out of time, find it and adjust it at that stage. Don't do it at the individual level, listen to the whole section, because that's closer to a real performance, what would happen in a real performance setting. Okay, now as I just finished checking Wanda's fine synchronization, I thought it might be worth recapping exactly what I'm doing here in the background. What I'm doing is I'm taking each singer one at a time and just moving their track slightly left or slightly right and checking the sound of that against the original guide track, just to make sure the synchronization is spot on for each singer. Now I've done that with the whole section, let's listen to the whole section at once. Great, that's beginning to sound like a soprano section, albeit a bit loud and not very well blended, but we can address that later. Hopefully you also noticed that some of the mistakes of pitch and rhythm that we spotted in the individual tracks when we were listening to them have now disappeared in the wash of the overall sound, just like they would in real performance. Right, next up it's the altos and the baritones. Now bringing in the altos and the baritones is going to be exactly the same workflow as you've already seen for the sopranos. I have pre-recorded myself doing this using a screen grabber while I was working in Logic, and for the sake of completeness I will have that playing here, but you may wish to skip this section unless you really want to see me do essentially the same thing that I've already done for the sopranos. So do look in the video description below to skip to the next section where I look at adding reverb, pan and EQ. For the sake of completeness, though, I have chosen to include the bringing in of the altos and baritones, and I know that some people like to see the workflow. So here goes with some snooker-style commentary. Process for the altos. There we go, just finding the alto tracks. Bringing them in one at a time, making sure that I don't also import the video. This time I just dragged them all in and didn't worry about moving them down, as there was only 4 altos I seem to remember. And then I moved them down en masse. Delete the extra tracks at the top. Select them all, cut off the beginnings, select them all again, right click and remove the SMPTE lock so I can move them back. Rough alignment, and deleting the spare tracks that I don't need anymore. Labeling those tracks. Let's speed this bit along. Okay, now muting everybody apart from Rita and checking her synchronization. Oops, I can see that I've muted the top group track, so I need to unmute that. Try again. Doesn't sound too bad. Laura next. Good. And finally, Anita. Okay, we're going to cut off those synchronization points now. Because remember, we don't want them to affect the normalization. And there we go, normalizing Rita, already normalized. And Laura. Bringing everybody up to roughly the same level so we can hear them. Now finding a point in the song that I'm going to use to check final synchronization. Mute everything. I'm choosing to use the second phrase rather than the first phrase because they've settled in by that point in the song.
Carry the lad that's born to be king.
Doesn't sound too bad. I will SMTP lock her, SMTP lock her.
Carry the lad that's born.
Again, Laura, a bit to the left.
The lad that's born.
Doesn't sound too bad. Let's lock her, SMTP lock her. TP,
Carry the lad that's born to be king.
Claire's sounding good. Let's lock her.
Carry the lad that.
Bit movement.
Carry the lad that's born to be king.
Doesn't sound too bad. And I'm using ticks again to move them so I get fine control. Okay. Let's shut the altos down. Zoom out and have a quick listen. Finally, so the baritones. And how many baritones am I going to have? It's like another 4. Now, because there's only 3 of these guys, I'm probably going to put myself in the mix as well. Right, what I think I said there is because there's only 3 baritones that put themselves forward for this particular project, I'm probably going to include my original guide track in the mix, the final mix, so I can beef it up a bit. Add a bit more of a baritone part to it, I guess. Have my own voice. Just tidying up the beginning, unlocking the SMTP positions. Gosh, they need to be moved quite a lot to get them in line with the clicks. And let's rename the tracks. I'll speed this bit up. And then remove the spare tracks. And let's turn Warren on so we can hear him, making sure that the main group this time is turned on as well so we can actually hear. Unlike the mistake I made with the altos. Doesn't sound too bad. Tim, up next. Good. Doug. Now I had to turn that up both on the group and on Doug's original track because he appears very quiet. Let's go through and cut off the claps at the start so they don't affect the normalization. And normalize all the tracks. This will really bring Doug up, as you can see. There we go, all normalized now. And find a nice spot in the song to check final synchronization.
Would the sailors cry?
Okay, let's try this one.
Over the sea to sky.
Listening for a section that's got good consonants in it or sibilances that we can measure against.
Over the sea to sky. Over the sea to sky.
Okay, Tim needs moving a little bit.
Over the sea to sky. Over the sea to sky.
Sounding better.
Over the sea to sky.
Okay, turn him down a little bit, move him.
Over the sea to sky.
Okay, his change on that melismatic note is late, so we can adjust that later on when we adjust any rhythms that are wildly out. But for now, that's it. If you skipped the last section, welcome back. If you managed to stay awake during that soporific snooker commentary, well done. Next up is blending the singers. So this is going to involve adding reverb and pan to give a sense of space and EQ. Let's start with the sopranos. It's important to remember how the template was set up. Each of the individual tracks for each singer gets routed in two different directions. So we have all the soprano tracks here that have their own fader and are routed through the group fader for the sopranos. So if we just have a quick look at that and turn everything else off, make sure that the baritones are all switched off and the altos, and we're going to just look at the sopranos individually. We've got a loop on over a little section, and you'll notice at the moment we can't hear anything. Turn the group track on for the sopranos. And turn the sopranos on one at a time. As previously mentioned, the group track at the top allows us to control the overall volume for all of the sopranos. There we go, we lose all of them if I turn it down. Whereas the individual faders for each track allow us to control individual singers. And that can prove useful if one is much louder than, say, another in a section. So, for example, if Amanda was much louder than Joe. And now I can control the whole section with the main fader for the sopranos. So that's one of the beauties of using a group. Apart from the visual side of things, you can have this fader at the top to control the whole section. But remember that the signal is also divided, as well as going through the top of the group, what's called the dry signal, we're also sending it through this bus 1, which brings it out over here. So by way of demonstration, I'll turn the main group down, so the dry signal is now out, and I'll turn the wet signal up, and that's the reverb unit on bus 1. Let's see what happens. So it's going just through the bus, not the dry signal. Bring the dry signal back in. So this is going to allow us to blend. Let's turn all of the voices down, including the guide track. So their signal is stopped at the first fader. Turn the group fader to roughly where I want it. Get it playing. So we're just hearing the reverb. And then blend each singer in by adding their dry signal. Now Jo King is appearing quite bright, so I've turned her down a bit. Now the reverb is given a sense of space. Remember, this is affecting the dry signal at the top en masse. Yeah, Jo is very bright, I might have to EQ her later. It'll be to do with the way she's recorded or a recording device. Now the reverb gives a sense of building and space. It gives a sense of the room we're recording in, but we can also use pan to put them on left and right in the stereo field. So I'm going to find another bit of music, so I'm getting bored of hearing that bit. And let's start adjusting them left and right. If you're wearing headphones, you'll really hear the difference. How you choose to set up your pan is obviously totally up to you. In former projects, I've actually put the sopranos all one side to varying degrees, so all slightly to the left, with the altos slightly to the right. With this particular project, I've blended them reasonably equally across the stereo field. Before repeating the process with the altos and the baritones, let's have a closer listen to the sopranos and just check whether there's anything that's standing out that we need to adjust. Now, as you can hear, there is one voice that stands out as very bright in the mix. I'm pretty sure from what we saw earlier it's Jo, but I'm going to use soloing here to double check. Soloing different voices. That's 3 voices. 4, still sounds okay. Okay, let's try another little group. Ah, it does sound like it's Joe. Yes, it definitely sounds like it's Joe. What's basically happened is her recording device naturally has recorded her as being very tinny, so it's the effect of her recording device. Let's try muting just her. Noticeable difference in the mix. Now this is one of the issues where everybody will have recorded using different devices, and most of these devices were not actually designed for recording really good quality sound. So you're going to get a variety of sound qualities, and by adjusting EQ you can make things sound more homogeneous. So I've loaded up Joe's track here, I've soloed it, and I'm going to click in this box here which brings up the EQ. Let's have a listen to her again without any EQ. Let's try Making Warmer, which is one of the presets. I'm not noticing much of a difference there. I'm going to use the on-off button to turn it on and off so we can hear the difference. Off and on. And now some playtime. It's certainly sounding better. Now there's a whole science behind EQ, and you can find other videos out there that will show you how to do what I'm doing here in Logic. Let's have another listen. Right, now that's sounding more blended now. It's sounding more homogeneous, more like a choir section with no one standing out. So that's what you're aiming for. And I was just adjusting the EQ, lowering certain frequencies and raising others, just to bring Jo into the mix better so she blends better. Over the course of the 9 projects I've done so far, I've sometimes received videos with background noise on, such as air conditioning units or even noise from their computer. This can often be removed with EQ too. Here is an example. If I solo this track and play it back to you, hopefully you'll be able to hear the high-pitched sound in the background. It sounds a bit like the type of pitch you get off of fluorescent lighting. You can see it on the EQ. If I make it a bit more extreme, you'll see the pitch range. What we can do is we can put in a filter at that exact pitch that will isolate it and remove it. So if I grab one of the medium filters, pull it down, I'm going to make it thinner so it covers a narrower pitch range, and then move it to where the pitch is. And hey presto, it disappears. If I turn the EQ on and off, you'll really hear the difference. There's clearly a timing issue in this section. Let's have a listen.
Sweet bonny boat, like a bird on the wing.
You can hear they relax into it. The consonants don't quite line up at the start. What we need to do is turn on the flex option for all of the tracks. So I'll highlight all of the tracks, including Chloe at the top, which is of course the original guide track, and I'll turn it on. This will just take a few seconds, so I'll speed it up. And now it's done. And if we zoom in a little bit, I'm going to zoom in to make the tracks wider, so you can see the waveform a bit clearer, and you'll see that these lines have begun to appear all over the tracks. Those lines are where Logic has analysed the various components of the waveform. Now I'm going to change this setting to polyphonic. I find polyphonic to be the best algorithm for adjusting rhythm. If you select all of the soprano tracks or all of your tracks and then adjust one of them, you'll notice they all jump to the same, and that just saves having to do them one at a time. Now that they are all analysed by the polyphonic algorithm, I'm going to unsolo everything apart from the guide track and Amanda. So we're going to compare Amanda against the guide track. I've just noticed that I need to actually set that to flex time as well. Let's have a listen. So there's a timing error in the middle there, slightly out. You can even see it visually that that line is out of alignment with the line on Chloe's guide track. So we can move Amanda by putting our cursor in the middle, and this kind of 3 funnel icon appears, and we can then drag that line left or right to line it up with the guide track above. So let's have a look at that. Alright, so just move that slightly, and now we'll add Helen in.
Speed bonny boat like a bird on the wing.
Okay, so just move that bit to the left and add Joe in.
Speed bonny boat like a bird on the wing.
You can notice you can do this by eye, by lining them up vertically above so they line up. There we go.
Speed bonny boat like a bird on the wing.
Okay,
Speed
Mona.
bonny boat like a bird on the wing.
This time I'm going to put a lock in, put a flag either side. If you do it near the top, you only get one of the funnels appear. Then you can move this one in the middle. There we go.
A bird on the wing.
So it puts like a lock either side.
A bird on the wing.
Let's carry on. Page.
Speed bonny boat. Speed bonny boat like a bird.
Right, I've unsoloed those other tracks so we can hear a bit clearer. This is going to take a bit more work, so I'll just have a quick play.
Speed bonny boat. Speed bonny boat like a bird.
The little flags that appear, or markers, appear automatically as you click.
Speed bonny boat like a bird on the wing.
Sounding better? Teresa?
Speed bonny boat like a bird on the wing.
Tanya?
Speed.
Okay, she's out at the start, so I'll put a lock on the left, move that in line, and that.
Speed. Speed.
Yeah, I'm not happy with that sibilant sound at the start there, so let's try to make it smaller or shorter.
Speed. Speed.
Try to work out where that double sibilance is coming from.
Speed.
If you're wondering how I'm managing to trigger my playback and stop so quickly, I'm using the space bar. It's a shortcut. By hitting the space bar, it starts and stops logic. So it makes it a bit easier for playback.
Speed bonny boat like a bird.
Okay, it's bird that's wrong. Let's adjust that.
Speed bonny boat like a bird.
When you click in the middle like this, notice how it locks either side to stop it from moving. It's quite useful.
Like a bird on the wing.
That way you can isolate one area and not have the effect of everything moving like you just saw there. Everything's moved to the left slightly now.
A bird on the wing.
Okay, next.
Speed bunny boat like a bird on the wing.
Sue sounding good?
Speed bunny boat like a bird on the wing.
Not bad. Well done, Polly.
Speed bunny boat.
Right, Wendy's got a problem at the start. Now it's difficult to compare this to the top now because I've zoomed in so much. So I'm going to drag her track to the top so I can compare it to the original guide track. It'll be easier to see it then. Right, let's...
Speed bunny boat.
Right, boat is early, isn't it? Let's move that over. Notice how it stretches in between as well.
Speed bunny boat like a bird on the wing.
slightly behind there as well. Let's put a marker in there, a flag marker.
Speed, bonny boat, like a bird on the wing.
Righty, let's see the fruits of our labour. Solo everyone, so we can hear everyone together.
Speed, bonny boat, like a bird on the wing.
Lovely jubbly. Let's add the piano back in.
Speed, bonny boat, like a bird on the wing.
Sounding good. The tuning issues I'm about to show you are actually quite minor, and in reality I probably wouldn't bother pitch shifting them or adjusting them, as they're likely to only have a minimal impact on the overall sound. And remember that those minor little errors and mistakes are actually what make a choir sound like a choir. Anyway, for the purpose of demonstration, let's have a listen to the top 3 voices along with the guide track. Here goes.
On the wing.
And now just Helen with the guide track.
On the wing.
So there's a slight issue there caused by her vibrato.
On the wing.
Amanda pitch scoops up at the end.
On the wing.
And Wendy sounds a little flat. Double clicking on her track will open her track editor, and clicking track here and turning on flex, making sure it's set to flex pitch this time, and Logic analyzes the track and shows all the pitch regions.
On the wing.
If you look really closely, you can see that this region here, the wing, is a D, but it's slightly lower. The box is not quite sitting in the right place. Just zoom in a little bit. There we go. You can see just that box is just sitting underneath the D there. So I'll double click it to snap it to the grid.
The wing.
And now it's right on the nose with the D, sounding much better. Okay, let's have a look at Amanda. So I'll turn flex pitch on for Amanda. Wait for it to analyze. Now she's needs soloing. Turn Wendy off.
On the wing.
Oh yes, you can see the pitch scoop up at the end there. Let's drag those into place, double clicking and dragging them.
On the wing.
Now the wiggly line within the region shows the pitch fluctuation within the actual syllable or phoneme. You can adjust that with this vibrato
On
control.
the wing.
Again, I probably wouldn't do that in reality, but for the purpose of demonstration, let's have a look at the next voice. Turning on flex pitch for Helen and soloing her. Let's have a listen to her recording. Wow, the vibrato.
On the wing.
Huge vibrato there, you can see it.
On the wing.
So much so that it's actually split her region. So let's first of all
On the
snap everything into place, and now I've highlighted it all, and I'm going to grab the vibrato control and just tame the vibrato slightly.
On the wing.
Right, and now all 3 against the guide track.
On the wing.
Yeah, you can hear that the tuning issues have disappeared now with affected tuning, and you can go over the top with this. As I say, I probably wouldn't have actually adjusted those because the nuances are what you really want to keep in to give that human quality to your performance. Let's have a quick listen to everything.
Speed, bonny boat, like a bird on the wing.
Right, I'm going to listen through now and just do some adjustments, some minor adjustments on the fly.
Speed, bonny boat, like a bird on the wing.
Bring some more reverb in. These are not being used at the moment.
Carry the lad that's born to be king, over the sea to sky. Loud the winds howl, loud the waves roar, thunderclouds rend the air.
Without, with reverb. That's just the reverb signal. Oh, that's just the reverb you're hearing now. Just the dry signal. Ah, right. There's a timing issue here. People coming in early. This we can adjust. So let's go back into flex time. You can see, if you look really closely, they don't line up. Let's zoom in and have a good look. Right, so that's where the syllable should start. And you can see that a number of the waveforms across the voices don't quite line up. So let's change them all back to polyphonic to adjust the rhythm. And just move them back to line up with the guide track at the top. Remember, that's Chloe's guide track at the top that we know is spot on. So there we go, lining up. I'm going to just delete that middle one. Some of these are all right, but a few of them are just off. Particularly right at the bottom, look. Let's sort that bottom one out. Again, using the ones above to line up. Much better. Just a few more tweaks, I think. Right, let's go back a bit earlier and play it out. To recap what we've done so far, all of the voices have been brought into the mix one at a time. They've been synchronized and they have been blended together using Reverb to put them in a physical space, the pan controls to move them left and right in the stereo field, and EQ has been used where needed. And of course, any minor errors of pitch and rhythm have been adjusted using the flex option. If for whatever reason this isn't switched on, you can use the help menu to find how to turn the advanced features on in Logic. The final part of the process is to create the stereo track, the mix, that's going to be added to the video that we're going to create next. So to do that, we'll go to the very start of the piece where the piano accompaniment comes in, and I'm going to include the clicks for now because they will actually help us synchronize the videos when we get onto the video stage. Now, of course, if you're not going to be doing a video, you're only going to be generating an audio, you probably will want to miss an audio version, you probably want to miss those out. So you'll then start at the beginning of the piece. So I'm going to put the marker at the beginning, and I'm going to then go to the end and holding down Shift. Where's the end of the piece? All the way over here. It's because I'm zoomed in a lot. I'm going to put it here. And now I have got that. In fact, looking at it, it looks like I haven't sorted the endings out. So I've actually left all the endings on, which I didn't mean to do. So let's address that first. Let's get rid of the very ends for the sopranos, because if I leave those on, you're going to actually have the noise of them turning their cameras off. So I delete those and remove those. And I'm going to add something called automation. So I'm going to turn on the automation control here, which will show, if I zoom vertically, it will show the volume of each track. So if I click on here, there's the volume, which is minus 9.4, and I'm just going to put a point in there by clicking, and a point at the end, and then drag that down. So you're not really going to hear this, but if I solo that track and just play it, watch what happens to the volume control. Let's do that again. So if I play the very end, watch what happens. Now I've put that slope in there, that automation. If I play it, it turns it down automatically. So I'd need to do that on all of the tracks. So I'll do it the same here. Spots, drag the second one down. Where's the volume on that one? Oops, not wide enough. There we go, it's probably somewhere there. There we go. Go through and do all of the tracks, automating just the ending, because of course the reverb tail will make that less harsh as well, because it's still going through the reverb unit as part of Space Designer. So it will be less harsh, the cutoff at the end there. But anyway, you'll do that for all of the tracks, and then we can go back to our mixing process. One of the things I forgot to say earlier is we addressed mistakes that the singers may have made, and we also said that sometimes there may be background noise. But one thing you can do is, let's say that there was a background noise in a part. Let's say, for example, in Amanda's part, there was some background noise in here. If I just turn the automation off so we can see her track, you can just cut the bit out. So if I've got that on my right mouse button. If I cut here and here and delete the bit in the middle, that little bit I've deleted is not going to be missed in the mix because everyone else is singing around her. You might find it'll click as it cuts out and cuts back in again, in which case the way to address that is to use the fade tool. And I'm arming it to my right mouse button. So I now can, using my right mouse button, I can fade either side of that. Now, you may think that there's going to be a gap in her track. Now, if she was obviously singing a solo, we would notice that. But in the mix, you're not going to hear it. Let's just show you. I'll do it again. You don't notice it. So pretending that there was some type of background noise, maybe a door slamming or a dog barking or something in the background, you can just cut it out if it's a real problem. Anyway, enough of this. Let's have a look at the final mix. So if I go back, I'm just going to zoom in. Here we go. And go back to the starts. And turn on the marker by clicking up here. And I could drag right to the end, but that takes a while. So I'm going to actually zoom to the end. And I'm going to hold down Shift and press the marker now there to show the end of the piece. Now, if I zoom out, there we go. The whole piece is now selected. Now I'm going to mix this down using a technique called bouncing. So if you go to File and Bounce Project or Selection, and it brings up this dialog box. Now, if you're, as I say, if you're not going to create a video, you're just going to put an MP3 without all the videos merged together. You can select MP3 here. Obviously, as I said in part 1, to keep within the letter of the law, you're going to need to upload this to YouTube so you're covered by their licensing. And to do that, you would need to generate some form of video, even if it's just a collage of still photos. For the purpose of what we'll be doing in part 3 to create the video, I'm actually going to do PCM instead. And I'm going to select AIFF. Now, this is where you've got to be careful. With the sample rate, make sure it is set to the same sample rate as the video project that you'll be creating in the final part. As I noticed that the last video project was 44100, which was exactly what I needed. So I just left it set at 44100. Sometimes, depending on the devices that they've recorded on, you might end up with a project that's 48,000. So just make sure you've set it to the right one. I'm going to leave it as that for now. Then you'll click OK and select the place that you want to save it. And there's the final audio, and then you would press bounce and it would mix it down. It would also normalize the final track that you've created as well. The final mix would be normalized as well. So if it is slightly under 0 dB at its loudest point, it will bring it up to around about that level. Just so it makes the project as present and as loud as possible without clipping. So that's the final part, mixing down the final product, ready for the next stage. And that brings us to the end of part 2 in this 3-part series. Now, obviously, if you are using different software to do your audio editing, or if you've managed to get to grips with Audacity, the free software, the process is likely to be very different from what you just saw in my video. However, I'm hoping that by watching my process and seeing what I was able to do in Logic, it will give you some ideas for features to look out for in your own audio editing software, and also give you an indication of the type of way you could organise your workflow. Thank you for watching, and hopefully see you next time.